The protagonist in this story, Suzuki, had just died and appeared before a goddess who revealed that Suzuki died in an accident and that she would compensate him for the misfortunes in his previous life by granting him entry into a new world he desired. She asked him and another dead dude named Sasaki, who had also died, to choose what world they'd each prefer to live in. Sasaki said he wanted to be in Pound Town, beating the life out of whomever, and so the goddess blessed him with an SS-ranked ability. Meanwhile, Suzuki said he only wanted a laid-back life with good friends because in his previous life, he was an orphan who suffered, and now all he wanted was to spend his days in peace with kind people. The goddess said she would send him off to a world of farming difficulty with an ability where he was unconditionally loved by the local species, and Suzuki accepted it. They were sent off, but the goddess later realized she had mistaken their identities and swapped their worlds. As such, Suzuki woke up in an adventurer's land, standing before a king who addressed him as the mighty hero, but simply checking Suzuki's stats made the king aware that this guy was utter trash for a hero, and it only meant the Demon Lord's army would easily finish off the human race. The king was still talking when his neck was suddenly cut off by a monster, and the presence of the Demon Lord's army was announced. This army was led by a pair of demonic twins named Kuru and Meru, under a captain named Nephila, who had slain virtually everyone around our protagonist. Suzuki had been confused the whole time until he realized that the goddess had swapped him with Sasaki. He decided to escape right away, but he saw two maids in a corner crying for him to help them out. He assumed that the clumsy goddess had also swapped his ability with Sasaki's, meaning he'd get the triple S-rank strength. The incel thought he was Saitama, but his weak punch bounced off against the captain's nunnus. Her subordinates urged her to roast him to the ground, and Suzuki cried like a cowardly kitty, prepared to die in the worst way ever. Surprisingly, the annoyed captain had already fallen in love with him and struggled to get herself to finish him off because she had already threatened to do so and didn't want to look weak before her subordinates. Also, the evil twins truly didn't want Suzuki dead and hated to see him in pain, so they used their telepathic abilities to communicate with each other and find a way to stop their captain. Coincidentally, the captain changed her mind and commanded the twins to throw him into the castle dungeon with 3 meals daily and an afternoon snack. Suzuki didn't understand their sudden kindness and believed they were planning to fatten him up and eat him afterwards. However, Kuru and Meru burst out laughing that instant, saying there was no way they would eat Suzuki when he had a big bagel they could eat. They took him to their castle while their captain burned with rage and jealousy, watching them hold Suzuki so close to their goodies. In prison, Suzuki was locked up with some pretty hefty dudes but was treated like a king, with a special sofa to rest on. Meanwhile, the goddess realized she had given the guys their desired abilities but mixed up the worlds in which they reincarnated. Unfortunately, once a person had been Isekai'd, she couldn't bring them back, and contact from heaven was also forbidden. However, the skill bestowed upon Suzuki, as he had asked, which was to be unconditionally loved by the local species, could overturn the foundations of their world. Depending on how it was used, and if he understood how to make it work, he could become an actual hero. Much later, the captain had finished her duties and was excited that she'd finally get to see Suzuki, but when she got to the prison where Suzuki was held, she didn't see him there. She yelled at the newcomer, who was the guard there, asking what had happened to Kuru and Meru, and he reported that he sent the human slaves to the torture chamber, following the rookie manual. Instead of the praise he expected from Nephila, she whacked his skull out of his skeleton and outrageously told him to read the room. She was deeply annoyed because the noob sent Suzuki to the torture chamber, which was presided over by a certain guy named Guru and his gang, who shoved bugs into every hole he could find in a person. Women and their offspring weren't exempt from this, and even when humans had broken and lost their minds, the Gurus tortured without saying a word. Nephila knew she had to get him out of it, so she walked off to save her cute dude. Meanwhile, in the torture chamber, Suzuki was bundled up with some other humans, watching their comrades scream as they awaited their turn. Suzuki's companion in misery started begging for his mommy and daddy to help him, and seeing that the dude was in more distress than he was, Suzuki offered to go next, because it was obvious the torturer's goal was to enjoy it for as long as they could, and all he had to do was give himself up until the torturer got tired of him. One of the gurus appeared right behind Suzuki as he was speaking, and the other guy fled to the wall, begging the torturer to spare him in exchange for as much money as he demanded. The torturer flung him and held Suzuki's face, asking him how long he had been in prison, and admitted that staring into Suzuki's eyes bothered him so much that he suddenly didn't want to take his life at all. In all honesty, Suzuki thought all of this was sus, and the guy felt the same way, trying to figure out what had happened to him. He was so miserable that he bashed his head against the wall repeatedly and created a dent in it, and then realized it had been 10 years since he had been able to chat with any slave, or panicked so hard that he bashed his head in. In the first place, all the demon folks thought of him as a creep, and he was fine with that because, at the very least, he had bugs to serve as his besties. Every day, he played with bugs and humans, enjoying their reactions as they suffered. But for some reason, things were different the moment he set his eyes on Suzuki. He soon apologized, took off his cloak, and placed it on Suzuki, apologizing and saying he wouldn't do anything, so he shouldn't get scared. He took off whatever he had on his head and used it to wipe Suzuki's tears and snot. But to Suzuki's utmost surprise, his tormentor turned out to be a woman who said she was an ogre in a weird body. Because this lady looked like a ripped version of Shrek, she felt gross and unfeminine, but Suzuki told her he didn't feel she was gross and actually found her to be pretty cute. She was so shocked by the compliment that she went on the offensive, saying he was making fun of her, but Suzuki said that her face was much nicer and cuter without the thing on her head. She soon was convinced and smiled, bursting out into cute little laughter. Thereafter, she said she felt so good and wanted to talk more with Suzuki, so she asked for his name and showed him her pet worm named Doggy. Suzuki was spooked by the bug, which came to lick his face, so she took it out, and there she introduced herself as Guru but warned Suzuki not to bother himself trying to pronounce her name. Guru shared that she was bad at talking, even more so to a human, but things were different with Suzuki because merely looking at him made her feel so happy. But just then Captain Nephila barged in angrily. She was glad to see Suzuki and asked Guru who on earth she was, so Guru told her that she was the masked tormentor. She also stepped in front of Suzuki and begged Nephila not to execute him. However, Captain Nephila said she didn't need anyone to tell her that, and even told Guru to stop torturing Suzuki because he would be returning to the slave room. Poor Suzuki realized that no matter where he went, it was just another cute section of the devil's bedroom. But Guru said it was okay because if Suzuki was just a slave, he wouldn't get tortured or become food, and the slave room was the safest place in that hellhole for humans. For some reason, though, she was sad and later revealed that it was because he wouldn't ever visit her torture chamber again. And so, Suzuki seized the chance to beg her to stop torturing those poor dudes at the corner. She wondered why he made this request, and he said that ever since she had tortured them and they hadn't confessed to anything, he didn't want them to be hurt any more than that. Guru seemed to be against the idea, but Suzuki told her that if she could promise to leave those dudes, he would definitely visit her once more. She was surprised because he could get caught, but with the captain on her neck to round up her business with Suzuki, Guru immediately made a promise to him and dragged him into her cherry blossom garden. It came as no surprise that Captain Nephila was so pissed that she could shred them with a single stare. In any case, the captain left the torture chambers with her boy, with her guy, and at least Suzuki made it out in one piece, right back to the slave room. Being there, he realized there were more human slaves, and one particular girl stood out, who had referred to him as the hero. As Nephila dropped Suzuki in the slave room, she secretly wished he would be in her bed instead, but she couldn't do that just yet, and so she told him to be hopeful until selection day, on which an auction would be held to decide what demon a human slave would serve. She gave him a necklace bell of the sort, telling him to ring it if anything bothered him, and said that every human on that floor except himself would be burnt to a crisp. Suzuki said he didn't need the bell thing, and 1 week wasn't a big deal at all, but Nephila wasn't so pleased because she had put so much effort and magic into making that bell. When he was all alone with the humans, some of the big guys said it was quite surprising that Suzuki had the nerve to be chatty with those demon bodies. Someone noticed his facial features and instantly recognized him as the dimwit hero that the king had summoned, who was responsible for the destruction and damnation of their country and its people. They beat him to a pulp, but the princess of their nation stood up and begged them to stop. But one of the bullies said that since she was their former princess, it meant she was just as guilty for the country's destruction. And then they said she would atone together with Suzuki and the other old man for their failures. The guy grabbed the princess and immediately had ulterior motives towards her, but Suzuki crawled up from behind and told the ductard to let go of her. He said getting executed by some idiot like that guy wasn't up for debate and that he should stop blaming his hardships on others. The guy refused to listen and told Suzuki to bite the dust forever. But by then the princess stood behind him, placed her chains on his neck, and strangled the stupid out of him. This was all so surprising to Suzuki that the princess explained that as royalty, she learnt self-defense just in case a day would come when she needed it. She thanked him for saving her and introduced herself as Excella, the third princess of their kingdom. The old man beside her, Neo, was the princess's attendant who claimed he would only die after fulfilling his duty. Much later, the two idiots who had rebelled were bundled together, and Suzuki had narrated his story to the princess and Neo. Ella said that he was no doubt a sacred being since he was given another life by the goddess, but to have been misplaced with a different person was rather unlucky. Suzuki said that he was originally headed for a friendly, laid-back world, while the other guy wanted a messed-up world where he could beat the life out of wasted idiots. And so God gifted that dude to be the strongest, and if there was no mistake, the princess's kingdom would have been saved. Neo asked Suzuki what ability he had wished for, and Suzuki said he only wanted to be unconditionally loved by the local species. At first, he thought he didn't even get that ability because the first humans he encountered obviously disliked him, but demons were quite different and behaved only towards him out of many other humans. He had been wondering why initially, but had finally confirmed that being unconditionally loved by the local species meant that it worked only on the demons. On the good side, the demons wouldn't end his useless life, and he also got to enjoy nice chit-chats with them. Ella and Neo were too delighted and said what Suzuki reported was only expected as a gift from the gods. However, Suzuki told them that he couldn't even protect anyone but himself, and he could thank his ability, which helped him to avoid being slaughtered and tortured. But this didn't allow him to help others in any way, and that just made him all the more useless. However, Ella reminded him about the two maids in the castle whom he had tried to protect by standing up to the demon army, and said that thanks to the opening he made, the ladies were captured but not executed, and it was because of that that the girls could report this to the princess, although now they were in a different slave house. The princess also mentioned that if anything at all, she had been scared to death that she couldn't move, but what brought her back was Suzuki's bravery, and she was glad to have him there. Towards the end of her statement, she broke down crying, and Suzuki was moved to tears as well. And so he asked both her and her attendant to teach him all they knew about the world because he wanted to come up with an idea to help everyone out of the situation. A few hours later, Kuru and Meru were pissed that the dumb newbie necromancer sent Suzuki to the torture chamber and couldn't wait to chew on his bones. They could also tell that their captain, Nephila, was so enraged for the first time in her life, but they were glad that Suzuki had returned to the slave house. However, they were shocked to find Suzuki right in front of them, together with the army officer. Apparently, Suzuki had told the guy that he wanted to discuss with the captain, and so he had him bring him over. However, Kuru and Meru were curious about what he wanted to do with Nephila, and so he said that he wanted to become her exclusive slave. When he was finally granted an audience with Nephila, Suzuki told her that he wanted to become her personal slave. Instantly, she did emotional backflips, but claimed she was only dizzy from her exhausting workload. Obviously, she couldn't lose her aura as the captain of the demons, so she had to pull herself together. She first of all knew that selecting whomever a slave chose to serve had to be done according to the rules, because that was why Suzuki was jailed in the first place, and Nephila's signature had made that a law. However, to make everything advantageous for her, she simply took the same document and created a new rule exempting her from whatever she signed. She then said that normally it wasn't okay for him to be her servant with no auction, but captains could make independent decisions, and so she accepted his request. Suzuki said he had a favor to ask in return for being her slave, which was that the humans in the slave house should be placed with kind masters wherever possible, masters who won't use violence, especially on the princess. Nephila remembered the princess and said that if that would make Suzuki happy, she would consider it. Suzuki was glad in his heart because he had finally achieved his first goal. Earlier in the slave prison, he had discussed with Ella and Neo about how best to use his ability, and the plan was for him to become Nephila's slave and cozy up to the demons, build a good reputation and good relationships with them, and ensure the safety of Nephila and Neo, hopefully to a point where demons and humans could live in peace as equals. Anyway, Nephila sent them off to bed and Suzuki turned to leave, but she called him back, saying that he would sleep in her room since he was her slave. Luckily for him, he got his own bed, but Nephila wasn't quite satisfied with this because she was too excited that they were sleeping in the same room and kept peeking to watch him sleep. Dude was far gone in Z's land, but Nephila found this to be so cute that he caused her to explode in her underwear. In fact, she believed his cuteness wasn't for anyone to soil and he should be worshipped just like the devil. From there, she started sniffing him little by little. Eventually, Suzuki woke up to find her humongous planets crushing his magic wand. He screamed and almost shattered the fortress with his voice, begging the captain not to eat him. But she told him to calm down because she noticed he was hurt, as he had a deep cut on his head and bruises all over his feet and abdomen, so she was only using some healing medicine to tend to those wounds. She asked him when he sustained the injury, and he instantly remembered that it was those two buffoons in the slave prison who caused him so much pain. However, he lied to her and said he fell down the stairs due to fatigue. Nephila seemed to have bought his story and said that how a slave was managed reflected on their master's dignity, so next time he should tell her whenever he got wounded. The lady went back to sleep as if nothing had happened, but Suzuki couldn't fall asleep because he was scared he would find her doing something strange to him. 3 days later, he had got used to everything and realized that Nephila was literally doing slave duties as opposed to him. She cooked, cleaned, and made the bath for him, granted him freedom to go anywhere within the castle, and all the demons there treated him so well, and so, instead of being a slave, Suzuki was more like a distinguished guest. That particular day, Suzuki noticed that Nephila wasn't back yet from working all night. He soon started feeling like he had actually gotten into his laid-back, friendly world that he had asked the goddess for, but instantly shook the thought out of his head because he remembered his promise to Ella that he would try and fix this world. Later, he laundered his clothes and the twins met him, asking him if he was free. When they noticed he was washing clothes, they told him that he could simply have used magic and he felt stupid, saying he thought his thoughts would count at least. But later, the girls presented him with clothes as their gift to him. One of the twins, Meru, seemed to have a hobby of sewing, so she revamped a tattered dress for him. Instantly, Suzuki recognized the dress as the one he had given to Ella, and the girls agreed that it should. He was instantly worried that Ella was roaming about that prison with no clothes on, but they told him they had given her new clothes. He said he was worried that those two foolish dudes would see her and have their chance with her. But Meru and Kuru said that there was only the princess and her attendant in the slave prison, and those dudes who beat Suzuki up would certainly not make it out alive because no one in the first place wanted them as slaves, and they were only good as food. All this showed Suzuki was that Nephila saw right through his lies and went on to exert her revenge on those two guys for his sake. Well, it was clear at least that the world was as cruel as ever, and the divide between humans and demons would never be bridged. He was all of a sudden wondering whether cozying up to them as a slave was a smart idea, and whether the day would ever come when both humans and demons would live as equals. Later at night, he had dinner with Nephila and seemed to be quiet all through, so she asked him what was going on. She thought it had something to do with his food, which she had ensured was animal and not human meat, but Suzuki said her nicely cooked meat had him cooked. Anyway, she informed him that he would have to stay by her side all day the next day, because a certain demon army advisor named Surfiana was coming from the main demon castle for an inspection. Apparently, where Captain Nephila and the others stayed was a temporary residence to control the area of the human country, and they had a separate main castle. So the demon advisor came to check on the state of subjugated countries. Suzuki was shocked to discover that the tiny building he was in was only a fraction of the demon's lair. But Nephila told him not to look nervous because the advisor lady was amazing, and he would even get introduced to her. She narrated a short story to prove what she meant. Back then, when a human country called Kreblin was invaded, the forces invading were overwhelming, but the enemy had a powerful necromancer who used sorcery on the troops to instill the idea that demons and humans were friends, and even without realizing it, they were hypnotized to believe this. However, the demon army advisor Surfiano's third eye was no match, and when she looked, she saw right through it, released the spell on the demon troops and annihilated both the country and the necromancer. Instantly, Suzuki wanted to bury himself in the ground because the necromancer's ability was just like his, and that only meant he was dead meat. At the same time, a chariot approached with haste, and a lady within said they should make it 10 times faster. This was because she could perceive a strong, aggravating aura being released from a single human, which was getting stronger as she closed in on his direction, and she was more than eager to deal with the pest. This powerful beauty turned out to be none other than the demon army advisor whom Nephila had just spoken about. When Surfiano arrived, she noted that even after looking at Nephila's excellent report, having captured the human country, she was quite puzzled because the original plan was to exterminate every human within the castle. Nephila responded that she put humans on non-combat duties and devoted the effort to training since many humans in the country were harmless. Surfiano was quiet, but this confirmed her suspicions about the danger she sensed on her way, and she felt that Nephila was already under an enemy spell, probably a charm type, which was quite powerful. It could have been the same one that the necromancer of Kiblin used before, but Surfiano had never felt such energy like that before. Either way, she was the demon army advisor who saw through everything, and as soon as she met whatever threat that was, there would be extreme agony and then death. Accidentally, Suzuki barged into the room, forgetting to knock, looking for extra snacks, but the moment Surfiano laid her eyes on him, all her common sense flew out the window. She lied that it was just her family's traditional way of drinking, but truly, she had been attacked by Suzuki's overwhelming cuteness. She also realized that he was the source of that power that had been attracting her to the palace, and that meant that after executing him, the rest would be history. However, Suzuki made things worse because he walked up to her to apologize that he could not use healing magic, but he could help to massage the hand that was hurting due to her spilt coffee. When he did that, she was even more obsessed because he was being both cute and manly towards her, and she found herself giving in to his charm. She then told Nephila that she'd be headed underground with Suzuki and that no one was allowed in there with them, not even Nephila. Really, Surfiano was only trying to avoid getting more drawn in by Suzuki's cuteness and wanted to just end him before Nephila and the others would try to stop her. Nephila on her own was worried about Suzuki, knowing he would be completely nervous around Surfiano, and she hated her audacity to be so upfront about her urges with Suzuki. However, she wondered why Surfiano chose the underground area and suspected the lady just wanted to play tag. However, Surfiano was actually dealing with the poor guy, and soon after they got there, she bashed him into the ground, telling him not to draw any closer to her, lest she destroy the castle along with him. She insulted him, saying he was another silly ability user from another world, and that she'd never turn a blind eye to that energy she was getting from him, because she had heard the humans of the recently conquered human country were trying to summon a hero, but never expected that such a deadly weapon would appear. Suzuki tried to defend himself, but she said that she was very aware that all the demons in the castle were under his spell, but that would end soon because she would end him quickly and destroy his spell. Before she knew it, she lost her mind and acted erratically, all thanks to the bloodlust she had, which made her mind more susceptible to falling for Suzuki's charms. She flung her swords right out of magical portals to grab him, but only ended up tying herself down because she wanted to be in control of her body, which was moving against her will. So she could also prevent herself from setting her eyes on Suzuki. She also planned to seal her third eye at the center of everything, which would then end up nullifying Suzuki's power. Anyway, she decided to show Suzuki that a true spellcaster didn't rely on just one thing, and she could prove it to him. While she was still bound, she summoned a mighty golem, which would represent her because it only listened to the creator's instructions. Instantly, she commanded her golem to slay Suzuki, and a hot chase began, alongside tons of punches. As the golem was determined to crush Suzuki, he could sense genuine bloodlust from this creature, and it reminded him of the first time he had confronted Nephila and thought he would be speared to death. However, he never sensed such bloodlust because Nephila and every other demon that hadn't taken him down had never directed their bloodlust towards him, which was naturally aimed at humans. But right now, the bloodlust from this golem had made him paralyzed in fear, and he was pretty sure he was about to die. However, a memory of the princess flashed in his mind, and he remembered he had made her a promise to do his best. Currently, though, he wondered whether he was satisfied with all he had done because the world hadn't changed one bit. He yelled out, saying he wanted to leave, but instantly, Surfiano stopped right before her golem and prevented it from crushing him to death. She had failed to shield herself by sealing off her hearing so his charms wouldn't get to her in any way. Anyway, the golem had hurt her really badly, and she was coughing up blood but still said that even Suzuki's cries were so cute, and that was such a crime. However, Suzuki noticed that the woman was dying and instantly tried to help her until she ended the battle, looking pretty dead at the end. However, much later, the captain appeared there, saying that Surfiano wasn't dead and had made it out alive thanks to her super smart brain. Don't ask me how. Suzuki remembered that Surfiano had threatened him not to tell a soul about their incident, so when Nephila asked, he told her that they actually played tag. However, Nephila said she had a question for him, which pertained to a rumor she'd heard about him wanting a world where humans and demons would be equals, and that he'd been taking actions for that reason. Suzuki admitted that it was true and remembered a conversation he had with Surfiano, where she confessed that she couldn't bring herself to hate him even though she knew that, as an advisor, she wasn't supposed to overlook someone who was a menace to demons. She asked him whether he really had no intention to destroy them, and he said that he truly was scared and saddened to see a lot of humans lose their lives, so he only wanted a world where demons and humans lived in peace as equals. Surfiano was surprised and smiled, saying that if that was the truth, then it gave her peace, and that was what happened before she passed out. Suzuki said that Surfiano had given her approval, but Nephila said that there was no way his pipe dream would come true because Surfiano only smiled because of how reckless his idea was. Nephila also reminded him that she had considered his wishes and turned a blind eye to all humans on several occasions. Even before meeting him, she was never really interested in humans who weren't a threat. However, humans had taken the lives of so many demons, and she felt that those humans who were planning to summon a hero were all the same in reality. Suzuki knew this was the truth because the hatred of humans and the bloodlust of demons were both powerful and relentless, and there was no glimmer of hope. However, he blurted out loudly that he couldn't stand just watching how things were without doing anything, which was why he decided he would do things his way to change the world. Nephila stared at him almost as though she wanted to say something, and he assumed she was going to tell him that it was impossible and he should just give up. Still, she really said that if he really had faith in his idea, then the possibility wasn't zero, and the easiest way to accomplish what he planned was to quit being a slave and enlist in the demon army. Essentially, if he became a trooper, he would be given slaves and territory, and the higher his standing was, the more privileges he would get, which he could use to his own taste. However, she told him that the Thunderdash Spear Army's enemies were humans just like Suzuki, but if he was down, though, all he had to do was take her hand. He knew that the best decision was to accept it because Nephila didn't harbor any hatred or bloodlust towards him. And from that moment onwards, Suzuki joined the Thunderdash Spear. Soon, the environment around him began to change, and the value of his ability would be demonstrated in a new way. His enlistment was announced, and the demons muttered, saying it was quite strange for a human to be joining their army. But because it was beloved Suzuki, they threw him a huge welcome party. But just then, some reptile demon objected to his enlistment, saying he was an eyesore. Suzuki noticed that the vibe with this one was different from that of the other demons, and he could feel his pure blood lost towards him. However, Nephila told the guy that his objection was overruled because everyone else had approved, and it was her decision as leader. She then commanded everyone to return to their normal training and duties, and then handed Suzuki to some dudes named Bronzes. They were led by a necromancer, and his team welcomed him and said he should cheer up a bit. The leader of the team asked him if the reptile demon Garger gave him the creeps, and said it was justified because the dude's brain was normally on vacay. Besides, he was obsessed and only thought about eating humans, proving his actions by eating people's human slaves. As he listened to this, Suzuki was stunned to believe that one of his fellow humans was eaten so casually by Garger. But his trainers told him that Garger was a silver, and if Suzuki trained with them, nothing would happen to him. The demon troops all had a rank, starting from bronze to iron to diamond and then silver, above which was literally with the clouds. Currently, Suzuki felt he could assume that his rank was now bronze, but his troop members told him that since he had only enlisted recently, he was at the level of a pebble, which was what everyone started out as. However, with enough hard work, they said he would be a bronze. He asked them how they ascended the ranks, and they said it was through fighting battles. Apparently, the quickest way was through troop duels, by which if Suzuki could defeat some higher-ranked demon, he could trade places with them. They put him through intense training, but he only kept going because he owed it to Excella and Nia to save them and the rest of the humans. A few hours later, Suzuki had grown strong enough to defeat one of his troop members. Although he believed that they all were letting him win and deceiving him, especially because it seemed they all fell before his attacks even hit. He was angry when a huge hairy monster tapped him, and he felt that it would be his opponent. However, the troop leader said the guy was named Gregorio, and that he was back from guard duty. Apparently, Gregorio wasn't a talker but was so super talented that he rose to bronze on the very same day that he arrived, which was just a few moments before Suzuki's arrival. Suzuki, hearing this, realized that the people there were huge and seemed tough, but he could learn from them if they could put up an actual fight with him, so he asked Gregorio to spar with him. The monster nodded, and Suzuki hugged it, enjoying its softness and all of that. He was prepared to make up for his weakness with his ability, but found out that it didn't work on this dude because Gregorio smacked the whack out of him and made him puke. Thereafter, Gregorio sat on him and kept smacking him so much so that the remaining troop members felt bad and wanted to stop him. However, the goblin among them said the rules stated they would need 30 points if they wanted to save Suzuki. Anyway, when Gregorio was done with Suzuki, he could barely open his eyes and his necromancer leader went to check on him. Suzuki realized that he was so terribly weak and that he had to try even harder. A month later, Nephila thought about Suzuki, especially how hardworking he was and how he was showing off his strength every day. However, she wanted to reward him and go there, but she felt she may have gotten the perfect excuse to visit him. She surprisingly showed up at his place and brought him Excella. Suzuki was shocked and asked Nephila what she was up to, and she told him that the soldiers were praising him for his work ethic and commitment to learning how to fight, so she thought it would be fine to give him a single slave. He meant his new slave was the princess, so Suzuki was super pleased to reunite with Excella. However, he noticed her feet were trembling and asked her, and that there were marks there, so he asked her what happened. Nephila confessed that she had severed the princess's tendons, so she wouldn't escape, as slaves usually tried to. Suzuki was shocked for all the wrong reasons, and yelled at her saying she had to be kidding him, but then he explained he yelled back at her telling her to shut up because now the girl Excella might never run again. Nephila realized they were arguing in front of a slave, so she had to breathe in and out and get her words right. Thereafter, she referred to Suzuki as a lowly pebble and asked him not to get so conceited, because she was only granting him a single human out of respect for his work ethic, and it was not any form of praise for his military strength. Besides, there was nothing he could do all by himself because he couldn't live or fight, and if he wanted to get high and mighty enough to defy her, then he had to prove his strength, that he had the strength befitting of it. Instantly, he rushed out of the room, ignoring the princess, who tried to call him back. Meanwhile, Nephila was so worried for him, and when the princess tried to find out whether Suzuki would be back, she told the girl to shut up. Meanwhile, back at the training grounds, Suzuki immediately asked to participate in a troop duel, and he wanted to do so right away. However, the moment they granted him his request, he was face-flat buried into the ground, as he had gone head-to-head with his captain. Meanwhile, Suzuki lay with his thoughts, realizing that everyone was fond of him and looked after him, and that he had been cherished in that world. So, when things got pretty serious, the demons would all gather around him and try to cater for him. Anyway, he trained all by himself too, even at nightfall, ignoring his troop members, who told him they could stop for the day. They could tell that he was being angry, and so the goblin dude said that whenever he eventually collapsed, the patrol would find him. Suzuki trained even under the rain, but eventually dropped his sword onto the ground with a defeated look. He remembered Nephila's words when she told him to prove his strength before he could try to stand up to her, until the idiot thought he could simply command fire to appear on a rainy day. Unfortunately, nothing came out, and he realized that he was just scamming himself, because even though he was in this Isekai'd, he was just a pebble, and a pebble was just a pebble. He wailed and cried his eyes out, but Gregory appeared from behind, telling him that no matter how many decades he put in blood, sweat, and tears, he would never defeat the demons through strength. Just then, Gregory went poof and revealed her true identity to be that of a human named Rylu. Suzuki was pretty surprised to find that there was another human in the demon army, but she told him not to make so much noise because this horizon was not too far-fetched from his own. Using a transformation technique, she infiltrated the Thunderdash sphere and waited for a perfect opportunity to disrupt from the inside. But because Suzuki was quite the fool, she could no longer sit by idly and decided to revise her plans. Suzuki went from shock to annoyance because everyone called him trash, a pebble, or a fool when he knew all of that by himself the entire time, which was what prompted him to work his guts out. But Rylu smacked him out of his stupidity and told him that there was nothing more tedious for her to listen to than the excuses of a fool. However, she said he may be a fool, but it wasn't that he was also powerless, because if he was just a powerless fool, she wouldn't have taken the risk of undoing her technique, and she was confident enough to wager on the potential of his ability. She told him to accompany her to her dwelling, which was where she would reveal everything to him, and they arrived at a hut in the woods which was camouflaged by trees from the sky and everyone's view. She said no one ever visited there due to the camouflage, and then instructed him to strip because he could catch a cold being so soaking wet standing under the rain. However, he told her to put on some clothes before he'd get her high on meatballs. Nevertheless, she told him she was pretty sure he saw many more amazing pairs like Nephila's every day. However, Suzuki told her that those were scary. She mocked him, saying this was the supposed hero who couldn't stand the sight of some good old melons. Suzuki said he didn't mind because he knew he didn't have the qualities of a hero, and his strength and ability were garbage. However, she told him that his abilities were quite amazing, and that the issue was that he had yet to fully leverage them. She told him that with just his cuteness, he could save the world, and that she was serious because she truly believed in that. Thereafter, she pulled out a scroll saying there were secret writings that had techniques to help him make the best use of his ability, titled the 48 Moves of Cuteness. Suzuki wondered whether he was in a preschool class or facing a toddler in a grown woman's body, so he told her that she was definitely making fun of him. However, Rylu blocked her ears, saying that even though she thought of him as a fool, she was pretty serious about what she said. She also told him that it seemed he was convinced that only physical strength and magic were necessary to save the world. But he was wrong, because even battles that caused demons to struggle most didn't entirely rely on military force. She then stated that her speciality was in transformation techniques, and for several years, she thought she had fought against the demon army as an equal. Anyway, Suzuki for a second picked up on what she really meant, and if it meant she really did fight against the demon army as an equal, there was more mystery to her person. Rylu continued, saying that Suzuki's power was quite something because it had robbed Surfiano of her sanity, despite her being the most ingenious demon army advisor. He was surprised that Rylu didn't know about this, even though it had happened in the underground arena, and so she told him that ever since he had been summoned, she had always kept an eye on him and had come to understand several things. The first was his ability had a greater effect on female demons than on males, because in males, the effect of the ability was halved. He realized that she was right because that lizard demon, Garger, seemed not to have been as affected as the torturer girl, Guru. Anyway, Rylu continued saying that to oppose the ladies and upper demons like Nephila, something was devised which was known as pretties, and supposing Suzuki had learnt to use all 48 moves of the pretties, he would become several dozen times cuter. Rylu was stunned to hear her say that his cuteness could be multiplied by dozens, but she told him to stop being cringe and to hurry up, master his ability and save the world. That aside, Rylu asked Suzuki what his dream was, and he told her that he really wanted to save the people around him so that slaves wouldn't be sliced on their feet. And also, so one day a world where everyone could be friendly would be created. She looked him squarely in the eyes and told him that he would be staying with her from that day onwards, because it was a race against time, and she had to teach him right away the pretties. She also smiled charmingly as she revealed that they both had the same goal. Ever since Suzuki left, following his fight with Nephila, the captain had been quite morose, and both Nephila and her room were tattered. Akira and Meru noticed this and were worried, but Excella returned, saying that Suzuki was back. All the demons were excited to find that he was around, although he was currently at the underground arena about to engage in a troop duel. Kuru and Meru told Nephila about it, saying they should go take a look, and Nephi had the feeling that there was no one that Suzuki could defeat, so she would have to watch and ensure that he didn't get hurt. In the arena, a whole crowd was gathered, and demons cheered Suzuki on. The moment Nephila set her eyes on Suzuki, she was excited that he was alive, although she noticed that there was something different about him, and in some way he had become 100 times more cute than he was before. She convinced herself that it was the Mary Jane talking, because she hadn't seen him in a while, because it was impossible for him to get 1,000,000 times cuter overnight. But shockingly though, his opponent turned out to be an upper iron-ranked soldier, so she was confused and asked why that was happening. Excella told her that the skeleton warriors were former humans, so that would be okay. But Nephila told her that even though they weren't aware of it, because after a skilled human had been executed, they were summoned through magic. The one facing Suzuki was a widely known master swordsman named Fred, so it was virtually an impossible fight for Suzuki. She planned to apologize to him about the other day so he'd just come back, but Suzuki's opponent made the first move, warning Suzuki that he couldn't hold back in a troop duel. Suzuki said he didn't mind and they should give it his all, and then he extended a hand to the guy, a friendly handshake that somewhat started disarming the guy. Anyway, the battle was started, and the referee told Suzuki and his opponents to assume their positions. But even after ordering that they could start fighting, no one made a move. It was obvious, as Nephila pointed out, that the battle was already concluded from the moment Suzuki held a handshake with his opponent because he had seemingly captivated the guy. This was all thanks to the hours of brutal training under Rylu's tutelage and moments of torturing the poor guy that no one saw at all. Suzuki really mastered the art of being cute and even told his opponent that he genuinely wanted to fight him fairly and squarely. However, this was just one of the moves, the pretty moves known as upturned eyes. The moment he did that, both his opponent and Nephila noticeable due to his cuteness, while Nephila wanted to barge through the railing and hug him. She noticed that Fred was still willing to fight squarely against Suzuki thanks to his strength as an iron rank. On the other hand, the necromancer knew something was going on, and he would be in deep trouble if he didn't finish the fight quickly, as his rank was second only to his life. He decided to finish everything at once, activating his secret art of Skeelmorph, which transformed his left hand into some sort of weapon. Cairo and Meru felt that was unfair, but Nephila said that the skeleton wasn't breaking any rule because his ability wasn't a foul, and the tips of his hands were blunted to avoid slaying anyone in the process. He activated it in full swing and went on slashing all around Suzuki, but despite his intense speed, nothing seemed to affect Suzuki, who cutely said that he didn't even see Fred's hit at all. That move was known as the Defenseless Act, and Ella thought it was all thanks to Suzuki's skill that the undead were unable to hit him at all. However, Nephila explained that it wasn't just that the guy's attacks didn't hit, but rather that the guy could not afford to hit Suzuki at all because he was too cute. However, if Suzuki were ever hit in such a defenseless state, no matter how blunted the tips of Fred's weaponized arms were, he would be dead already. Soon, Fred collapsed to the ground, wondering why he could not hit Suzuki, and then he admitted defeat, withdrawing from the match. In the end, Suzuki was declared the winner, and his people celebrated him even though they didn't understand for 1 second how he could win. From behind, Ella ambushed him with a warm hug, wondering why he was gone all of a sudden, but her seemingly innocent hug really caused him so much hurt. She calmed down and he told her it wasn't her fault, as he had so many bruises. He lifted his shirt and showed her handprints, and she was enraged with a lonesome aura, wondering who on earth could have done that. However, Suzuki refused to say a word and shifted his attention to Nephila, telling her that he'd won. She said that it was splendid and that she would give him her reward, but he bowed before her, saying he was sorry for disappearing, even though he was supposed to be her assistant. She turned and with tear-filled eyes told him never to make that mistake again. Next, he informed her that he would be headed into the woods with his maid, Ella, and she made him promise to return before sunset. Ella wondered where they were going in such a forest. He told her there was someone he wanted her to meet who had taught him techniques to fully leverage his ability. Even though she was rather strict, to his greatest shock, he found that Rylu's house had disappeared, as the tree there was chopped down and the house was dismantled. He, however, found a letter there saying that Surfiano had noticed Rylu's presence, and the girl had to depart the country before the military advisor would pursue her, so she bade him farewell. She stated that she thought she would be used to farewells, but it was quite difficult for her because Suzuki charmed her beyond her expectations. However, she said that even if they were apart beneath the same sky, their feelings were one. Already, Suzuki was shedding tears because he had so much he wanted to tell her, so he burst out crying and calling out for his master. After a while, Ella asked him whether the master he had referred to had pink hair. It was surprising, but the princess actually knew Rylu and said the girl was the greatest intellect of humanity and unmistakably had to be the former Imperial Army strategist, Rylu Dimension. It was just as the demon army had Surfiano as an advisor that the human Imperial Army had Rylu, because she was the army of hope. The princess had heard that Rylu was executed in the final stages of the Great War, but she was glad to discover that she was still alive. After taking all this in about his master, Suzuki decided to head back and said they couldn't keep crying about it since, after all, he was aiming for the same future as Rylu. He also told Ella that he wouldn't give up until the day he could meet his master again with a smile. Moments later, Surfiano returned, and Nephila asked her why she had returned so soon. Surfiano said that her third eye had sensed another human other than Suzuki within the demon army's Thunderdash sphere. But when she arrived, that feeling had already disappeared. However, Surfiano knew that there was no ordinary person who could outmaneuver her, and so she suspected that the intruder definitely had to be the former Imperial Army strategist, Rylu. Nephila blurted out that Rylu definitely was executed during the war, but Surfiano felt that Rylu may have faked her own death so she could move behind the scenes in the next battle, and it wasn't something she wasn't capable of doing anyway. As Suzuki observed Surfiano, he realized that both Rylu and this Surfiano were excellent strategists, and their powers exceeded what one could possibly imagine. Anyway, Kuryu suddenly broke the awkward silence with some dumb thing which he had heard, saying that Suzuki could now have a son. Suzuki could now have 5 slaves as an exception. But Mary told her dumb thing to shut her trap up, because obviously she couldn't read the room, given that Surfiano was there. That was a promise, but everyone fell silent with even more awkwardness. Surfiano said there was no helping it and reprimanded Nephila, saying the rules were strict so they would have meaning. Nephila tried to explain, using a light to cover it up. But she immediately told Suzuki that he would get 3 slaves instead of the 5 that were promised. Suzuki made an acute face unintentionally, acting quite shocked to support Nephila's lie. But Surfiano soon fell backwards and threw her legs up in the air, so Suzuki could take the hint. She then said that if the rules were broken for Suzuki, then it was okay because he was cute. Suzuki felt that since he had gotten quite a nice response, he could push for a bit more, so he asked for a huge domain. However, Nephila called his name out, and so did Surfiano, both warning him not to get ahead of himself, although Surfiano agreed to give him what he asked for. He also asked her if they could set the slaves free, but at that point, Nephila wanted to whack his brain in order. Surfiano equally told him to stop talking nonsense. But another side of her wanted to grant him all he had asked for, so this led to her somehow falling out the window, because her reason and instincts went into conflict and ran wild. Luckily, though, she wasn't dead, so Suzuki could keep his head on his neck. The next day, Suzuki headed into town with Nephila after they left the castle and crossed a certain bridge. They arrived at a huge mansion, which Suzuki was told was his home, although Nephila told him it was quite small compared to the castle. Regardless, she told him the place was enough for 5-6 people, and they went inside to tour the building. He had a nice bed, which he enjoyed bouncing on until Nephila told him that was where they had executed the original owner of that house. He suddenly felt bad knowing that the house was plundered, and the family who once lived there were going through really tough times. Nephila noticed his mood and asked him what was up with the suddenly meek face, thinking it was because he was very pleased by the story she told. But he told her there was no way on earth that such a thing would happen, and he wouldn't even stay in that room anymore. Just then, someone walked into the room with Suzuki's slaves, comprising Ella, Neo, and a family who introduced themselves as Alan and Kate, alongside their daughter, Clarice. Nephila told them they'd be Suzuki's slaves from that day onwards, and should listen closely to him. Playing along, Suzuki turned on a stern expression and said they'd all be working as his slaves, and he'd deal with any form of insolence accordingly. Nephila praised him for a job well done and headed back to work, and as she turned her back, Suzuki apologized to the slaves, saying he had to act evil to satisfy Nephila. He said they only had to cook and clean and spend their lives as freely as they wanted. He also said that if they ever got involved with demons in town, all they had to do was mention his name, and they would probably be fine. Alan and his wife were so grateful and thanked Suzuki. Then Ella asked Suzuki about why Surfiano visited them yesterday. Much later, they concluded their discussion, and Neo told Suzuki that it was best to stop at the huge domain, at requesting for the huge domain, because pushing Surfiano too far might help her sanity to come back quickly. And if somehow Suzuki had struck an agreement with Surfiano, the other demons wouldn't keep quiet. So Suzuki said that at this pace, he would climb the ranks and expand his domain and slaves. Neo told him that was a hasty way to think about things because the more Suzuki ascended the ranks, the higher the risks of getting in battle would rise. And as such, they had to be cautious. Timidly, Kate interrupted the conversation and asked to confirm whether Suzuki was truly planning to save the world. He affirmed what she suspected and said that if he were stronger, he would have done it already, but due to his weakness, it was a long-term plan. He hadn't even completely finished when Kate and her husband immediately fell to their knees, bowing before Suzuki because they had lost hope and believed the world had come to an end for them. But God hadn't abandoned them apparently, since Suzuki still had it in mind to rescue humanity. Kate also said that she didn't mind how many years it would take as long as one day her daughter would be able to live in happiness. The next day, Suzuki returned with some fresh fruits for his slaves, excitedly anticipating their reaction. But he opened the door to find that the house was in shambles and Alan was bleeding, begging him to help Kate and their daughter who were outside. Suzuki ran outside to find that reptile dude, Garger, terrorizing Kate and her daughter. He saw Suzuki and called him a dimwit, and then pulled Kate's daughter from her arms, placing the baby in his mouth. Both Kate and Ella screamed in agony, begging Suzuki to come to their aid. But the next thing they saw was this idiot waltzing happily like he'd just binge-watched his favorite brain-rot content, Skibidi Toilet. Ella couldn't understand Suzuki's stupidity at such a time, and was terribly disappointed in the one she once referred to as a hero. However, somehow Suzuki was only using one of the 48 moves he had learnt in Cuteness 101, and it worked on Garger, who let him snatch the baby. Ella was amazed, realizing the power of the pretty's technique, as Suzuki had only drawn his opponent's attention with his cuteness and easily reclaimed baby Clarice. Within her soul, Ella repented because she had really planned to wallop the stupid out of Suzuki, but now she realized she was wrong. Suzuki asked Garger why he attacked Alan and the others, and Garger said that he was simply hungry. Just then, as the fight almost got heated up, Nephila appeared, saying that fighting among troops was a violation of the rules and Garger in particular would be discharged if he misbehaved any further. Garger said that Nephila was playing favorites and pretended his interest had waned, saying he would come next when Nephila was out on a trip. As he turned to leave, Suzuki declared a troop duel and said that if Garger really hated him that much, they could settle with a troop duel, and if Suzuki won, then Garger would have to swear never to attack humans ever again. Garger said that would only happen truly if Suzuki won, and then he made a cut on Suzuki's face. Nephila was pissed, but Suzuki told her it was just a scratch, and it was a fight between him and Garger. With that, Garger accepted the challenge, but Nephila said that she was against the idea of that duel, because the rules wouldn't hold anyone responsible for ending a life and lying. Suzuki said he understood, but had no intention of stopping the duel, but he only wanted to know why Garger hated humans and fixated on them that much. Nephila then said that she didn't know the specifics, but 30 years ago, something happened. The scene switched to show a grave built for Alan, who lost his life due to excessive bleeding. His wife bawled her eyes out in agony as she grieved her husband, while Ella asked Suzuki whether he really was going to fight Garger. Neo said he was against the idea just like Nephila, and said that Suzuki's technique wasn't fully effective since Garger could somehow injure him. But he said Alan had entrusted him to take care of his wife and daughter, and his dying wish just had to be respected, so he would certainly win against Garger's madness with his cuteness. Meanwhile, Garger was all on his own, and his hands were shaking, losing control. Apparently, the little scratch he gave Suzuki felt like he had mashed it onto the floor, and Suzuki's power was definitely why the others couldn't lay a finger on him. He tasted his finger, though, and said that Suzuki's blood tasted exquisite, just as he had thought. Apparently, he had tasted it 30 years ago, and it tasted like the blood of a certain girl, and no matter how much he threw up, the suffering never ended. In particular, women and their offspring were delicious, but after eating them, his suffering still continued. However, Suzuki's blood tasted different, and the sweetness still spread in his mouth, even with only a few drops. Garger was now hungrier than ever to taste Suzuki's flesh, because that would finally set him free, and as a demon, he would attain higher heights. Eventually, the day of the battle arrived, and the referee announced the troop duel between Garger and Suzuki. Garger asked Suzuki whether he had bid Nephila farewell, because that day, he would definitely taste that death. Afterwards, the referee got them all set, and the fight was set to begin. The scene changed, showing the backstory of a girl named Mimi, who one day encountered the demon Garger. She had always been nice and sweet to him, playing with him even when he didn't care about her, but one day he ate her up, and ever since then his mouth had been engulfed by salt. So right now, his best chance of changing that taste was winning the fight against Suzuki. When the battle began, the crowd began cheering, mostly in favor of Suzuki. Nephila tried to let Suzuki remember that Garger would feign surprise and deal a fatal blow, so he shouldn't avert his eyes even briefly. On the other hand, Garger said Suzuki was making fun of him because he showed up to their battle unarmed, but Suzuki said fighting wasn't all about strength, and he would show Garger what he meant. However, before he could finish talking, Garger made a cut on his face, which started bleeding and angered a whole lot of the demons there. The guy burst out laughing, saying if Suzuki could not even touch that, there was no hope for him, and that was expected from a wuss who only rose up from favoritism. Suzuki told him to shut up and said he would trust in his teacher. At that moment, he remembered the fourth move out of the 48 moves of Pretty's, which was hand-holding. He immediately squeezed Gaga's wrist and stared at him with poppy eyes. Gaga burst out laughing, asking what weird nonsense he was up to. And then he said he would bite and chop off Suzuki's arm first, but to his utmost surprise, Will suddenly transformed into the girl Mimi. Immediately, Garger screamed his lungs out, saying that Suzuki shouldn't mess with him by using an illusion. He got angry and activated Serpent Claws, but Suzuki jumped out and activated a special move known as the Pouty Face. Obviously, this got the crowd's attention, and they all thought he was cute, but Garger said there was no way on earth that was cute. However, it seemed cute Mimi had shown up again and was saying he should stop teasing her. So he was totally surprised, wondering why Mimi from 30 years ago was standing right in front of him. Thereafter, he decided to rip out his left arm, but everyone thought he had lost some screws in his brain. However, Garger hadn't gone gaga just yet because he knew that intense pain could stop illusions. Immediately, Suzuki drew close to him, saying his hand seemed hurt, and he wondered if he was okay. But already, Suzuki's cuteness was no longer working on Gaga, and Gaga saw him as just a weakling that he could cut right away. However, Mimi, for no reason, appeared, saying that being mean was bad. So the moment Gaga reached out for Suzuki's head, he was confused because it seemed Mimi and Suzuki had split up. Suzuki activated the 13th out of the Pretty's moves, which gave him teary eyes. Mimi asked Garger whether she should grab some medicine for him, but he swung at Suzuki and unfortunately missed. Mimi said she was worried seeing so much blood come out, and Garger relentlessly tried his best to grab Suzuki, and he was getting extremely frustrated. But Mimi held him tight, asking him not to be upset, and after a while he burst out laughing, saying he had finally confirmed it, that it was all make-believe because there was no way Mimi would say such things alive, as the girl would be full of resentment and hatred. However, he said he did not mind and would absolutely eat her again and swallow her whole. But just as he was about to finish her off, Mimi smiled sweetly, and he was shocked, wondering why on earth she was smiling. He believed he had eaten her, and there was no way she would smile. But she told him that Suzuki had nothing to do with that, and that she was smiling because she would always love him. Joyfully, she wrapped her arms around his hand, and Garger was dismayed because he couldn't believe that even while having been eaten, she could still forgive him. Back then, for the entire 30 years, he had been plagued by the taste of salt and thought his tongue was messed up, when indeed he had loved Mimi the whole time. The final move Suzuki had played was to have a bright smile on, but already Garger had bowed in defeat on his knees. It shocked the whole crowd to see Garger on his knees, confessing his love for Suzuki, but he later told Suzuki that it wasn't to him he was confessing, but rather to Mimi. In the end, the referee professed his love to Suzuki. The referee announced Suzuki as the winner of the troop duel, and everyone celebrated him. On the other hand, while everyone was joyous, the night ended in deep silence for Garger, and he reported to Nephila, saying he was leaving the Thunder Dash squad of the Demon Army. She asked if he wanted to be transferred to another squad, but he said he didn't belong anywhere anymore. The twins wondered why he was leaving and suspected that the taste in his mouth was gone, so they wondered whether he was bitter about losing to Suzuki. Suzuki, however, said it wasn't that way, and he was pretty sure Garger wouldn't eat humans anymore, having made peace with Mimi's memory. This inspired Suzuki to begin a brand new project of his own, and the goddess who'd sent him to this world noted how he had survived by being super smart and shrewd. That being said, the only surprise was that he was still alive, and to give hope to humanity, she released strength and revelation unto Suzuki, who had proven himself to be a real hero. That's it for this video. Give a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video and subscribe to the channel for similar content. As always, thanks for watching.